The crown was cardboard, covered in cheap gold foil and sequins. As my daughter Rachel placed it on my 77-year-old head, I saw the words written in black marker: Queen of Disappointments. The room of 100 guests at the birthday party I'd paid for with my postal pension, erupted in laughter. Rachel took the microphone. My mother taught me that showing feelings is overrated. Let's toast the Queen of Disappointments. I smiled, nodded, kept that ridiculous crown on my head through dessert. Then I excused myself to the restroom and called my attorney. Gerald, it's Dorothy. Finalize those papers. I'm ready. 3 weeks earlier, I'd rewritten my will. Everything, my house, my savings, 40 years of careful planning, now belonged to my grandson Nathan. My daughter? She'd inherit the crown she'd given me. Nothing more. They say birthdays are meant to honor the life you've lived. On my 77th birthday, I paid for the cake, the venue, and the catering, only to watch my daughter hand me a glittering crown that read, Queen of Disappointments. The room erupted in laughter. I smiled, nodded, and swallowed the lump in my throat. They didn't know I had already rewritten my will, so while they toasted to my inheritance with cheap jokes, I was quietly ensuring they wouldn't see a cent of the fortune they believed they would inherit. But before we dive deeper into the story, tell us where you're joining us from. They say old age is the time when you finally stop caring what others think. Yet here I stood in my best blouse, lavender, soft, with pearl buttons that I'd ironed twice, unable to help wishing that were true. My name is Dorothy Albright, though most people in Pinewood call me Dottie. At 77 years old, I shouldn't care what others think of me, especially my daughter, who has regarded me as inadequate for decades. Nevertheless, here I was, half an hour early to my own birthday party, a party I had paid for myself. The banquet hall at the Pinewood Crown smelled of fresh paint and artificial vanilla scent. I stood at the entrance, clutching my small purse, while the room buzzed with final preparations. White tablecloths covered the round tables, each decorated with overly elaborate floral arrangements that weren't to my taste. On the back wall hung a banner reading Happy Birthday. Dottie, in a cursive script I couldn't read without my glasses. Mom, you're early, said Rachel, who suddenly appeared beside me with a hint of irritation in her voice. My daughter had always been beautiful, her father's eyes, my mother's cheekbones, but time had drawn fine lines around her mouth, the kind that testifies to years of disapproval. The caterers aren't finished yet, she added. I wanted to help, I said, smoothing my blouse. It's a lot of money for a birthday. Rachel's smile became fixed. It's fine. We wanted to do something nice for you. We. As if she had contributed more than choosing the most expensive venue in town. As if my social security checks and my carefully saved postal pension weren't financing every snack and table arrangement. But I said nothing, nodded, and let her lead me to a small table near the kitchen doors. Your seat is here, she said, patting the back of a chair. Nathan helped organize everything. Nathan. The name of my grandson softened something in my chest. At 24, he was the only one who truly seemed to see me lately. He called every Sunday, drove me to doctor's appointments when my arthritis got worse, and never seemed ashamed of my modest house or practical shoes, as Rachel had been since her school days. The guests arrived in small groups, neighbors from my street, a few former colleagues from the post office, Rachel's friends I barely recognized. I watched them all, these people who had gathered to celebrate a life they knew so little about. Did anyone know I had once dreamed of becoming a botanist? That at 12 I had memorized the Latin names of all the flowering plants in California? That after Frank died, leaving me with a 3-year-old daughter and a mortgage that kept me up at night, I walked my mail route with pneumonia so I wouldn't lose any pay? I doubted it. In their eyes, I was just Rachel's mother, the old woman who lived in the same house for 40 years, the widow who never remarried. Grandmother. Grandma. Nathan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He stood before me, tall and lanky, in a blue shirt that was freshly ironed, his hair recently cut. You look great, Grandma. Thank you, sweetheart. I took his hand and he squeezed it gently. You're the only one who would say that and mean it. He frowned slightly. Don't say that. Everyone's happy to be here for you. I patted his arm. Of course they are. The open bar opened 5 minutes ago. He laughed, and for a moment I felt lighter. But then Rachel clinked a spoon against her glass to get attention, and my stomach tightened with a familiar dread. "Everyone, please take your seats," she called out. "We're about to start the festivities. As if my 77 years on this earth were something that needed to be performed, rather than honored. I watched as Rachel stepped into the center of the room, microphone in hand, her voice full of artificial enthusiasm I'd heard at PTA meetings and neighborhood barbecues. "We're so glad you all came to celebrate my mother's birthday," she began, and I felt myself shrinking in my chair. As many of you know, Mom never liked big emotional displays. A knowing chuckle went through the room. I kept my face expressionless, just as I had when Frank's family accused me of not crying enough at his funeral, or when Rachel's elementary school teacher suggested I wasn't involved enough in her education, even though I did homework with her every night after 10-hour shifts. But we thought, what better way to celebrate than with a little roast? Rachel continued, her smile bright and sharp. Before I understood what was happening, she came toward me, something shiny in her hands. As she got closer, I recognized it as a crown made of cardboard, covered with gold foil and sequins. But it wasn't until she placed it on my head that I saw the words written on it in black marker, "Queen of Disappointments." The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in laughter, some nervous, some genuine. I froze. The crown sat uncomfortably on my silver hair as Rachel returned to the microphone. For those who don't know, my mother has always been the queen of understated responses. She began in a theatrical voice. When I made the honor roll, she said, "Nice." When I graduated from college, she said, "Good work." When I got married, she asked if the venue had enough parking. More laughter. I felt everyone's eyes on me in the room, but I didn't move to remove the crown. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that this was my punishment for all the times I wasn't the mother Rachel wanted. For all the times my love was steady but quiet, reliable but not effusive. And don't get me started on her wisdom as a mother, Rachel continued, the microphone firm in her manicured hands. Mom's advice during my first breakup: there are other fish. During my wedding jitters, at least the dress fits. During my first pregnancy panic, well, babies happen. Nathan wasn't laughing. From across the room, I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes moving back and forth between his mother and me. He started to rise, but I shook my head almost imperceptibly. "Not now, sweetheart." "But seriously, folks." Rachel's voice softened slightly, though it remained tense. Despite her emotional coldness, or perhaps because of it, my mother managed to raise me alone after my father died. She worked hard, kept food on the table, and never complained about the cards life dealt her. So let's toast the birthday girl. The woman who taught me that showing feelings is overrated and a nod is as good as a hug. Glasses clinked, people applauded. I put on a thin smile, hands clasped firmly in my lap, though something inside me was collapsing. This wasn't a celebration. It was a public humiliation disguised as humor, resentment masked as a roast, and I had paid for every bitter word. Tina, the young photographer Rachel had hired, took pictures throughout the speech. Her camera captured everything: the crown on my head, the guests' laughter, my strained smile. Once our eyes met, and I saw in her eyes what I felt in my heart: pity. The evening continued. There was cake, more speeches, a slideshow with photos from several decades. I ate little, spoke even less, and kept the ridiculous crown on my head until dessert was served. Then I excused myself with all the dignity I could muster to go to the restroom. Fortunately, the restroom was empty. I locked myself in a stall, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I rarely used but knew by heart. "Office of Gerald Wagner," said the automated voice. "Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. For emergencies, press 1 to be connected to our on-call service." I pressed 1, waited through another series of prompts, and finally heard Gerald's familiar voice. "Dorothy, is everything all right?" His concern was genuine. In 30 years as my attorney, he'd never received a weekend call from me. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite everything. "I need you to finalize the papers we discussed last month first thing Monday morning." There was a brief pause. "The will revision. Are you sure?" Through the bathroom door, I could hear the muffled sounds of my birthday party continuing without me. Rachel's laughter, loud and performative, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations about a woman nobody really knew. "I've never been more certain in my life," I answered. "It's time." I hung up, put the phone back in my purse, and stepped in front of the mirror. The ridiculous crown sat crooked on my head. With deliberate movements, I took it off and stared at the mocking words for a long moment before throwing it in the trash. Then I smoothed my lavender blouse, freshened my lipstick, and walked back into the room where my family waited, unaware that with one phone call, I had just rewritten the ending of a story they thought they controlled. The morning after my birthday party, I sat on the back porch of my house with a thermos of Earl Grey tea, watching the day awaken in the neighborhood. The sun cast long shadows across my small garden. The hydrangeas needed pruning, and the bird feeder was nearly empty. But those tasks could wait. My body felt heavy, as if yesterday evening's paper crown had been made of lead. "Thought I'd find you here," said Margaret's voice from the side door. My neighbor of 30 years didn't wait for an invitation, but stepped into the garden with a paper bag in her hand. "I brought you lemon scones from Hanson's Bakery. Thought you could use something sweet after yesterday." Margaret Kemp had been a high school English teacher before her retirement. She still carried that mix of authority and warmth that had made her popular with generations of students. Unlike me, she had never married or had children. "Dodge that bullet," she'd joke, though I sometimes caught her watching young families at the park with a hint of nostalgia. "Have you heard already?" I asked, pouring her a cup of tea as she settled into the wicker chair beside me. "Tina's mother is in my book club," Margaret said, breaking a scone in two. "She said her daughter came home upset from photographing a birthday party where the guest of honor was humiliated by her own daughter. It wasn't hard to guess it was yours," I sighed. "News travels fast in Pinewood. Only the bad kind." Margaret studied my face. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I did. The crown, the speech, the laughter. With each detail, Margaret's expression grew darker, her lips pressed into a thin line. But when I mentioned the call to Gerald, her eyebrows rose. "Are you really doing it?" she asked. "Completely disinheriting Rachel?" I nodded, watching a cardinal settle on the bird feeder, its red plumage contrasting with the weathered wood. "I made the decision weeks ago, after that Sunday dinner when she corrected my grammar in front of her book club friends." "Remember?" "I remember," Margaret said softly. "You said I should stop waiting for validation from someone who shows me again and again that she won't give it to me." "I didn't think I'd actually do it," I admitted, hands wrapped around my teacup, the warmth providing comfort. But something about last night, all those laughing faces, the crown, how she used my birthday to publicly mock everything I am, everything I've done for her. It was like watching the last 40 years of my life rewritten as a joke. The memory of Gerald's office 3 weeks ago came back clearly. The leather chairs, the smell of lemon polish, the careful way he'd explained the consequences of my decision. "You understand this is quite unusual," he'd said, glasses perched on his nose, "completely bypassing your only child." Even then I'd been determined. I raised her alone. I worked 6 days a week to pay for her education. I never remarried because every minute I wasn't working was for her. And in return, she spent her adult life making me feel like I disappointed her. Gerald had made notes, his handwriting precise. "And you want everything to go to Nathan?" "Yes," I'd said. "He's the only one who's truly seen me." Margaret's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you okay?" "I'm tired of being the butt of jokes," I said quietly. "I'm tired of my love being devalued because it wasn't packaged the way Rachel wanted." "Love isn't always loud, Margaret. Sometimes it's double shifts. Sometimes it's giving up everything so your child can have something. Sometimes it's swallowing your dreams so theirs can flourish." Margaret reached across the small table and placed her hand on mine. "You don't have to justify yourself to me or anyone. Gerald will finalize the papers tomorrow. Everything goes to Nathan. The house, my savings, the pension. Rachel gets nothing. Do you think she suspects?" I thought back over the recent months. Rachel's increasing questions about my finances, her casual references to my property's increased value, her questions about whether I'd updated my arrangements, all barely veiled attempts to secure her inheritance. She knows I have a will. She just assumes she's the beneficiary. I took another sip of tea, which had grown cold by now. She never bothered to ask what I wanted. Never thought I might have my own plans. And Nathan? Does he know? I shook my head. Not yet, but he will. I've written him a letter that Gerald will give him after my death. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the birds and the distant sound of a lawnmower. The morning sun grew stronger, warming the air and casting dappled shadows through the elm above us. Finally, Margaret spoke. You know she'll fight it when she finds out. She can try. For the first time since the party, I felt something like peace within me. But Gerald assures me it's airtight. I had a psychiatric evaluation, 2 witnesses, a video recording of my declaration of intent. She'll have no grounds. Still, Margaret said, worry drawing lines around her eyes. It's going to get ugly. I looked around my small backyard, the garden I'd tended for decades, the bird feeder Frank had built when we moved in, the bench where I'd sat countless evenings watching the stars appear. This is my life, Margaret, my legacy. For the first time, I'm determining what it means. My phone rang inside the house. I excused myself to get it, returning moments later with a furrowed brow. Rachel, I explained, sitting back down. She wants to have lunch with me tomorrow to clear things up, she says. Margaret snorted. Damage control, more like. Someone probably told her how badly the crown thing went over. Probably. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the reply button. Should I go? Margaret looked at me for a long moment, her teacher's eyes seeing more than I sometimes wanted. Depends, she said finally. Are you going because you want to, or because you're still hoping she'll suddenly become the daughter you deserved? The question stung, so precise it was. How many dinners, holidays, and celebrations had I endured? Always with that small flame of hope that this time would be different, that this time Rachel would see me, really see me, instead of the caricature she'd created. I'll go, I decided, typing a brief response. Not for her, not even for myself, but because I want to see things clearly one last time before I close this chapter forever. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. Just don't forget, Dorothy. You don't owe her an explanation for protecting yourself. Love is not an entitlement. Love is not an entitlement, I repeated, the words sinking into me like a truth I'd always known but never spoken. I reached for my phone again, this time to call Gerald. This is Dorothy Albright, I said when his secretary answered. Please tell Mr. Wagner that I'd like him to bring the final papers to my house tomorrow afternoon. I'm ready to make it official. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 3 as Gerald's silver car rolled into my driveway. I watched from the living room window as he took his briefcase and straightened his tie before heading to the front door. Gerald had been my attorney for over 30 years. He'd handled Frank's will, my house refinancing, and now this final act of independence. Beautiful day, Dorothy, he said as I let him in. Gerald was one of the few who used my full name, and I appreciated the small dignity in that. We sat at my oak dining table, the one Frank and I had bought used when we got married. Like me, it had aged but was still sturdy. Gerald spread several documents before me, his movements methodical and deliberate. I've brought everything you requested, he explained, adjusting his reading glasses. The revised will, the letter for your grandson, and the documentation of your mental competency evaluation. I nodded, carefully reviewing the papers. My estate wasn't huge. The house paid off 10 years ago, my postal pension, the savings account I'd built up cent by cent, a few modest investments Frank had made and I'd kept. It wasn't a fortune, but enough to give Nathan a solid foundation. So Nathan gets everything, Gerald confirmed, pointing to the relevant sections. And Rachel is explicitly excluded as a beneficiary. Correct. Gerald cleared his throat quietly. Dorothy, I've known you a long time. Are you absolutely certain this is your wish? Disinheriting your only child is unusual. I looked at him directly. You know what else is unusual, Gerald? Raising a child alone for 40 years only to become the butt of her jokes, having your love reduced to a performance review, and being found lacking. Silence settled between us as I signed on the designated lines, each signature more certain than the last. When I finished, Gerald collected the papers with a solemn nod. I'll file them officially tomorrow, he said. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is for Nathan. He should open it when I'm gone." Gerald took it, handling it with due reverence. "May I ask what it contains?" "The truth," I said simply. "About why I made this decision. About the kind of love that doesn't need applause to be real." As Gerald left, a memory surfaced. Nathan, when he was 7 or 8, sitting at this same table on a rainy afternoon. While Rachel was busy with her social obligations, he'd asked me to teach him chess. I remembered his small hands moving the pieces with deliberate care, his serious face focused in concentration. "Grandma," he'd said after his 3rd lost game, "I don't mind losing if I learn something." I'd been so proud in that moment. Not the flashy kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that fills your chest until breathing feels like a blessing. "Dorothy?" Gerald's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said, standing from my chair. "I was just thinking about something important." After Gerald left, I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the garden bench. The afternoon was waning, and the shadow of my elm stretched across the grass. My phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Looking forward to tomorrow. Reservation at 11. Wear something nice. My friend Valerie might stop by. Instructions now. Suggestions for improvement, as if I hadn't known for 7 decades how to dress appropriately." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I sat there watching 2 goldfinches squabble over the bird feeder, their yellow plumage glittering in the sun. My garden had always been my sanctuary, the place where I could be without judgment or expectations. Frank had understood that about me. "Dottie doesn't fill the air with words," he'd once told his mother, who complained about my reserve. "She speaks through what she does, not through what she says." I wished Rachel had inherited that understanding instead of her grandmother's need for constant verbal affirmation. My phone buzzed again. "Did you get my message, Mom?" "Mom." With a sigh, I replied, "Yes, I'll be there." Immediately, 3 dots appeared. "Great, and remember, no cardigan. It's a fancy place." I set the phone aside, a familiar weight settling on my chest. Tomorrow would be difficult. Rachel would play the role of the concerned daughter wanting to clear things up, without truly acknowledging what she'd done. She'd justify the crown, the speech, the laughter, subtly suggesting I'd overreacted or misunderstood. I'd heard it all before. Those half-apologies that burdened me with the weight of forgiveness without her carrying the weight of genuine remorse. For years I'd accepted them, hoping that my patience would someday be rewarded with real understanding. But at 77, I had no more time for such illusions. As evening turned to night, I found myself in the guest room, where I opened the closet where I kept some of Frank's things, his fishing gear, his favorite sweater, the small wooden box where he'd kept ticket stubs from all the movies we'd seen together. "What would you think of all this, Frank?" I whispered into the empty room. "Would you understand what I've done?" Of course, no answer came, but as I ran my fingers over his old sweater, I felt a certainty that settled over me like a warm blanket. Frank would have understood. He'd always seen the strength beneath my quiet facade, the depth behind my reserve. He'd valued substance over performance. Just like Nathan did now. Tomorrow I would face Rachel at lunch. I would listen to her excuses and subtle manipulations. I would endure the curious looks and whispers from her friends. But I would do it knowing that for the first time in decades, I'd taken control of my own story. The ending would be written in my words, not hers. My legacy would go to someone who recognized its true value, not just the financial worth, but the value of a life lived with quiet dignity and unwavering devotion. In that night, as I prepared for bed and hung up the blouse I'd chosen for tomorrow, no cardigan as ordered, I saw my reflection. The face looking back at me was marked by years of work, worry and quiet sacrifice, but in my eyes, I saw something I hadn't noticed for a long time, the steady light of self-respect. Love is not an entitlement, I reminded my reflection. Margaret's words now firmly mine. Tomorrow would test that conviction. But tonight, in the silence of my own house, surrounded by the small treasures of my modest life, I was more certain than ever that I'd made the right decision. Sunday morning arrived with unusual warmth, as if summer had decided to show up early in our corner of California. I chose a navy blue dress with a subtle floral pattern, no cardigan as ordered, and drove to the Elderberry Inn, a fancy restaurant on the outskirts of town where wealthy people brunched on weekends. Rachel was already seated when I arrived. her blonde hair freshly styled, wearing a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her smile when she saw me seemed rehearsed, like that of an actress who'd practiced her entrance in the mirror. "Mom," she said, standing to kiss my cheek. "You look pretty." I sat in the chair across from her, noticing the half-empty mimosa beside her plate. "Thanks for inviting me." The restaurant buzzed with conversation and the soft clinking of silverware. Through the large windows, I could see a manicured garden where early roses were beginning to bloom. It was beautiful, the kind of place I'd never choose for myself. Too expensive, too focused on appearances. "I thought we should talk," Rachel began with that carefully modulated tone she used for delicate topics. "About the party." "I'm listening," I said, unfolding my napkin and placing it on my lap. Rachel sighed, a small, theatrical sound. "I think you misunderstood the spirit of the evening, Mom. The crown, the speech, that was meant to be funny. Sometimes people need something to laugh at." I looked at her directly, recognizing for the first time how much she resembled Frank's mother, not just in appearance, but in that particular ability to rewrite reality to suit her preferences. "At whose expense?" I asked. "It wasn't personal," she insisted, now defensive. "People do roasts at parties everywhere these days. It's a trend." "I see," I said, my voice calm despite the anger simmering beneath my skin. "And did you pay for these trendy parties too?" A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, passed across Rachel's face before she recovered. "Mom, don't be like that. I wanted to give you a special celebration with my money." The waiter appeared, interrupting Rachel's response. We ordered avocado toast for her, a simple omelet for me, and fell into an uncomfortable silence as he left. "I'm not here to argue," Rachel finally said, her fingers playing with her napkin. "I just wanted to clear things up. You seemed upset when you left the party." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and wondered when she had become someone who could humiliate her mother in public and then expect to be forgiven without genuine remorse. Had I done this? Was my quiet, steady love so inadequate that she'd learned to mistake cruelty for wit? "I was upset," I admitted. "Not because of a joke, Rachel, but because you turned a day that should have honored 77 years of my life, many of them spent raising you alone, into an opportunity to mock me. That's not fair. Mom, it was just a roast." "Yes, you've said that." I took a sip of water to collect my thoughts. "Tell me something. If Nathan had crowned you queen of bad parenting on your birthday and listed all the ways you disappointed him, would you have laughed along?" Rachel's cheeks flushed. "That's completely different." "Why? Because your feelings matter and mine don't? Because you were always cold." The words burst out of her, surprisingly vehement. "My whole life I've craved affection that never came. Do you know what it's like to have a mother who never says, 'I love you,' who never hugs you, who treats every achievement like it's just meeting basic expectations?" Each accusation hit me like a physical blow. Did she really see me this way? The woman who worked 60-hour weeks so she could attend dance classes and summer camps, who stayed up until midnight sewing costumes for school performances, who didn't buy new clothes for years so she could be fashionable. "Love isn't just words, Rachel," I said quietly. "It's actions, sacrifices, putting someone else's needs before your own. Day after day, year after year." "But sometimes words matter too, Mom," she said, her voice now almost pleading. "Sometimes people need to hear how you feel, not just see what you do." Perhaps she was right in her way. Perhaps I should have been more demonstrative, more verbal, more affectionate. Frank had been the one who said, "I love you" easily, who distributed hugs and kisses liberally. After his death, those expressions had seemed hollow to me, more performative than genuine. Maybe so, I conceded, but that doesn't justify public humiliation. The food arrived and we ate for several minutes in tense silence. Outside, a young family walked past the window, the parents holding hands, a small child laughing at something I couldn't see. I wondered if Rachel and I had ever looked like that, truly happy in each other's company instead of playing the roles of mother and daughter for an invisible audience. "I wanted to ask you something," Rachel said, breaking the silence. "About your will," there it was. "The real reason for this lunch. This attempt at reconciliation. What about it?" I kept my voice neutral, cutting my omelet with deliberate care. "Well, I spoke with Martin, my financial advisor, and he mentioned it might be time to update your estate planning, Rachel said, her tone casual, but her eyes watching me closely. Especially with property values rising in your neighborhood. You are planning to keep things in the family, right? For a moment, I considered telling her the truth, that her inheritance was already gone, redirected to the grandson who had shown me genuine love without expectation. I imagined her surprise, her outrage, the inevitable accusations of betrayal. Instead, I simply said, "I've already taken care of that." Rachel nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer, not understanding its true meaning. "Good. That's responsible. You know Nathan could really use the help when he finishes school. And Martin says your house alone could be worth nearly $300,000 now." I looked at my daughter's face. The face whose fingers and toes I'd once counted in a hospital room. The face I'd watched in sleep during childhood illnesses. The face that had barely looked back at me the day she left for college. Despite everything, I still loved her. But love without respect is a hollow thing, an empty vessel that holds nothing of substance. "Rachel," I said, setting down my fork, "do you ever see me as a person? Not just a mother, not just a source of financial support or criticism or disappointment, but a woman who had dreams and fears, a life that existed before you and will continue after you?" She blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "Of course, Mom." "What kind of question is that?" But I saw the truth in her eyes, the confusion, the inability to see me separate from her needs and expectations. In that moment, I understood with complete clarity that Rachel would never truly see me. Not the way I wished she would, not the way Nathan saw me. "It's all right," I said, picking up my purse. "I should go. I have things to do at home." Rachel frowned. "But we've barely talked." "I know what you wanted to talk about," I interrupted gently, "and I've told you what you needed to hear. My affairs are in order." As I drove home from the restaurant, I felt an unexpected lightness. The conversation had been difficult, but it had confirmed what I already knew in my heart. My decision was right. I hadn't made it out of spite or resentment, but from the clear understanding that some relationships can't be healed, some chasms can't be bridged. Most surprising was the absence of guilt. For decades, I'd carried the burden of Rachel's dissatisfaction, wondering if I could have been a different kind of mother, a better mother. Now I finally understood. I had been exactly the mother I knew how to be. If that wasn't enough for Rachel, perhaps nothing would have been. The afternoon light fell through the kitchen windows as I heard Nathan's car. After the tense lunch with Rachel, I'd called him and asked if he could stop by. It wasn't an unusual request, but something in my voice must have conveyed the urgency, because he was there within an hour. "Grandma," he called, coming through the side door as he had since he was tall enough to reach the handle. "Everything all right in here?" "Just right," I replied, pulling a freshly baked apple pie from the oven. Perfect timing for dessert. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his lanky frame filling the space in a way that still surprised me. When had my grandson gotten so tall? There was something of Frank in him, those same thoughtful eyes, the slight forehead crease when he was worried. "You've been baking," he observed, kissing my cheek. "That usually means you have something on your mind." I gestured to the kitchen table, already set with plates and tea. "Sit down, we need to talk." Nathan settled into the chair that had always been his while I cut slices of pie and poured tea from the pot. His patience, his willingness to let silence exist without rushing to fill it, was something I'd always appreciated about him. "I had lunch with your mother today," I began, sliding a plate toward him. "I know," he said with a carefully neutral expression. "She texted me afterward, said you seemed distant." I couldn't help but smile. For Rachel, any deviation from her script was distant. "Nathan," I said, hands wrapped around my teacup for warmth, "I need to tell you about the birthday party." "Grandma, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." I interrupted gently. Because otherwise what I tell you next won't make sense. So I told him everything. The crown, the speech, the laughter, the years of small humiliations that had preceded it. The moment I realized that no matter what I did, no matter what I gave, I would never be the mother Rachel wanted. Nathan's face darkened as I spoke, his hands gripping his fork until his knuckles turned white. I knew something was wrong that night. I saw it in your eyes. I should have said something. No. I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. This isn't about blaming anyone. It's about the truth. And the truth is, I've made a decision that affects you. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. I've changed my will, Nathan. Everything I have. The house, my savings, the pension, now belongs to you, not your mother. Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock above the stove. Nathan stared at me, obvious astonishment in his eyes. Grandma, I don't want it. I mean, it's not about that for me. I know, I said, squeezing his hand. That's exactly why you're the right choice. You've never seen me as a resource to tap into or an obligation to fulfill. You've seen me. Nathan shook his head, visibly struggling to process the information. Mom's going to lose it. Yes, I said. She will. But this isn't about punishing her, Nathan. It's about acknowledging who truly values what I've built, who understands what my life has meant. When did you decide this? He asked. The legal papers were finished yesterday, but I've been thinking about it for months. Since last Christmas, when you spent 3 hours helping me sort through my photo albums while your mother complained about the lack of dessert options. A small smile played at his mouth at the memory. Those albums are important. They're your story. Exactly, I said softly. And you're the only one who cared about that story. The only one who asked about your grandfather. About my life before I was just someone's mother or grandmother. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his pie untouched. She's going to blame me, you know. She'll say I manipulated you. Let her, I said with more firmness than I'd intended. Gerald has documented everything. My mental competence, my clear declaration of intent. This was my decision, Nathan. My last act of independence. I stood, went to the drawer by the sink, and pulled out an envelope, identical to the one I'd given Gerald. This is for you, I said, returning to the table. It's the same letter that's with my will, but I want you to have it now. Nathan took the envelope, holding it carefully. Should I read it now? Please. He opened it with deliberate movements, unfolding the pages of my careful handwriting. As he read, I watched emotions play across his face. Surprise, sadness, understanding. My dearest Nathan, I had written. If you're reading this, it means I've finally found the courage to tell you the truth. The truth about your mother and me. The truth about why I chose you to inherit not just my possessions, but my legacy. My whole life I've been judged by what I didn't say rather than by what I did. By the hugs I didn't give rather than by the sacrifices I made. For being steadfast rather than effusive. Reliable rather than emotional. Your mother never understood that love can be quiet and still deep. That some hearts speak through actions, not words. But you understood. You saw me when no one else did. You didn't recognize my silence as emptiness, but as a different kind of fullness. When you were 8, you said, Grandma, you remind me of the oak tree in the backyard. It's not flashy, but it's always there, and it's stronger than anything. That was the greatest compliment I've ever received. What I'm leaving you isn't just money or property. It's the testimony of a life lived on my own terms. It's the freedom to build your future without the weight of others' expectations. Use it wisely, live authentically, and remember that true value isn't measured by what you say, but by what you do. With all my love, Grandma Dottie. When he finished, Nathan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Grandma, he whispered, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied, a burden lifting from me. That's the point, isn't it? He laughed then, such a warm, genuine sound that it filled the kitchen and my heart at once. He stood from his chair, came around the table, and embraced me gently. I promise, he said, his voice firm and convinced, to live in a way that honors you, Not just as my grandmother, but as a woman who mattered, who still matters. We stayed like that for a moment, both aware that something important had passed between us. Not just the legal transfer of an inheritance, but the passing of a deeper understanding, the recognition that dignity isn't bestowed by others, but claimed by oneself. When Nathan released me, he looked at the untouched pie. "We should eat it before it gets cold," he said, sitting back down. "After all, apple pie is part of your legacy, too." I smiled, cutting my own slice, which tasted sweeter than most. That afternoon, we talked for hours about his studies, my garden plans, memories of Frank, hopes for the future. It was the kind of conversation that nourishes the soul without demand or performance. As the day waned and shadows stretched across the kitchen floor, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. The decision was made, the truth was spoken. Whatever storms might come with Rachel, I would weather them, knowing that my legacy, not just my possessions, but the truth of who I was, rested in hands that truly treasured it. And for the first time since that humiliating birthday party, I didn't feel like the queen of disappointments, but like the queen of my own quiet kingdom, small perhaps, but fiercely and finally mine. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, a pale pink envelope with Rachel's flowing handwriting on the front. Inside was a card decorated with pastel rattles and teddy bears, announcing a baby shower for Rachel's little bundle of joy next Saturday afternoon. I stood at the mailbox, reading it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. My daughter was having another child, my third grandchild, and I was finding out through a formal invitation instead of a phone call or visit. I sat on the porch swing, the invitation trembling slightly in my hand. Rachel was 43 years old, which made the pregnancy high risk. Yet it hadn't occurred to her to tell me directly. Perhaps it was her way of extending an olive branch after our tense lunch, or perhaps it was simply another performance, the dutiful daughter including her mother in family celebrations to keep up appearances. Either way, I knew I would go. Not because I owed Rachel anything, but because a new life should be celebrated, regardless of the complicated relationships surrounding it. The week passed with quiet preparations. I crocheted a blanket from soft yellow wool, my fingers working the familiar patterns while my thoughts wandered to Rachel's childhood. How small she'd seemed in my arms, how her tiny fingers had gripped mine with surprising strength, how I'd whisper promises to her in the midnight silence to give her everything I could, to protect her, to always love her, and I had kept those promises in my way. Perhaps not perfectly, not enough to satisfy her desire for verbal affirmation, but steadily and reliably, with a devotion that had shaped my entire life after Frank's death. Saturday came with unusually warm sunshine, as if the universe itself was celebrating the child's arrival. I dressed carefully, a simple blue dress and pearl earrings, wrapped the blanket in tissue paper, and drove to Rachel's house on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, the driveway was already full of cars, luxury sedans and SUVs indicating the social circle Rachel had cultivated. Music and laughter poured from the open windows as I walked to the door, gift in hand. Valerie, Rachel's friend, opened at my ring. Her smile flickered slightly when she saw me. "Mrs. Albright," she said, stepping back to let me in. "Rachel didn't think you'd come." "It's my grandchild," I replied simply, following her into the crowded living room. The room was transformed with elaborate decorations, balloons, floral arrangements, a professionally designed banner reading "Welcome Baby Albright" over the mantelpiece. A table near the window held a mountain of gifts wrapped in expensive paper. Women in designer dresses stood in small groups, holding glasses of what was presumably non-alcoholic champagne. I saw Nathan near the kitchen door, deep in conversation with a young woman I didn't recognize. When he saw me, his face lit up and he came quickly over. "Grandma," he said, hugging me. "I'm glad you're here. Did you know?" I asked quietly. "About the baby?" He nodded, a hint of guilt in his eyes. "Mom made me swear to keep it secret. She wanted to tell everyone at once." "I see." I handed him my gift. "Can you put this with the others? I should greet your mother." I found Rachel in the dining room, surrounded by a circle of friends admiring her, one hand placed protectively on the slight curve of her belly. She was radiant, cheeks flushed with excitement and pride. It took a moment before she noticed me standing at the edge of the group. "Mom," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "You came?" "Of course," I replied, stepping forward to kiss her cheek. "Congratulations." There was a strange tension between us, noticed by the women around us who withdrew with murmured excuses. Soon Rachel and I stood alone by the table with the elaborately decorated cake. "I didn't think you'd want to come," Rachel finally said, after our brunch. "This isn't about us." I gestured to her belly. "It's about the new life you're bringing into the world." Rachel's expression softened somewhat. "Well, thank you for coming. The gifts are in the living room if you want to add yours." "Nathan's taking care of it," I said. "A blanket. I made it myself." Something flickered in Rachel's eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, that she'd expected something extravagant, something to match the designer baby clothes that undoubtedly filled the other packages. Before I could respond, Valerie appeared at her side. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "But we should start the games soon. People are getting impatient." "Of course," Rachel nodded, her attention already diverted from me. "Mom, there's a seat in the back for you." I found the assigned chair tucked in a corner, partially obscured by a large potted plant. Visible enough that Rachel could say she'd included me, but far enough from the center of activity not to interfere with her carefully staged event. As the party continued, I sat quietly, watching the elaborate games, the theatrical opening of gifts, the constant photos documenting every moment. It was a beautiful celebration, objectively speaking, yet everything had something of a show about it, an event designed more for social media than genuine connection. During a break, when Rachel went upstairs to freshen up, Nathan came to my corner with a plate of cake in his hand. "Holding up?" he asked, settling into the empty chair beside me. "I'm fine," I assured him. "Just observing." Nathan followed my gaze around the room. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" "It's exactly what your mother wants," I said, accepting the cake he offered. "And that's what matters today." We ate for a moment in pleasant silence before Nathan spoke quietly. "People are talking, Grandma, about the will. I think someone from the law office must have said something." "I expected that," I said. "In a town the size of Pinewood, secrets rarely stayed secret for long. Are they giving you trouble about it?" He shrugged. "A few whispers. Nothing I can't handle." "And your mother?" Nathan hesitated. "She cornered me in the kitchen earlier. Kept asking what I'd done to convince you, as if it was my idea." He shook his head. "I didn't say anything. Figured it's your story to tell." "Thank you," I said, patting his hand, grateful for his respect of my privacy. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Rachel's return, and Nathan squeezed my shoulder before heading back to the center of the gathering. I remained in my corner, watching as Rachel reclaimed her place at the head of the room, the perfect mother-to-be surrounded by admiring friends. It wasn't until the party was winding down, guests leaving with kisses and promises to visit the baby, that Rachel finally sought me out. Her expression was tense, controlled, but I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Kitchen," she said. Not a request, but a command. "Now." I followed her into the spotless room, gleaming with high-end appliances and marble countertops. The door had barely closed when she turned on me. "How could you?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "Cut me out of your will. Give everything to Nathan, after everything I've done for you." So it was true. The news had spread. I looked at her calmly. "What exactly have you done for me, Rachel?" "I've included you in my life," she cried, making a broad gesture. "Family dinners, holidays, this party, despite how difficult you can be." "You've included me," I repeated, the irony almost painful. "You've tolerated me. That's a difference." "That's not fair," Rachel said, her voice rising. "You've treated me like an obligation," I finished for her. "A burden to be managed, an embarrassment to be explained." "That's not true," she protested, but the conviction in her voice wavered. "It is true," I said quietly. "And we both know it." The birthday party was just the final confirmation of what I've felt for years. So this is revenge. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Punishing me for a silly crown. I shook my head. This isn't revenge. This is clarity. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small wrapped package I'd brought in addition to the blanket. This is for the baby, I said, placing it on the counter between us. The only thing I owe. Rachel stared at it, then at me, her expression torn. You can still change your mind, she finally said. About the will. There's still time. That's true, I agreed. But I won't. I walked to the kitchen door, suddenly tired of the tension, the manipulation, the performative relationship we'd maintained for so many years. If you leave now, Rachel warned, her voice brittle, don't expect to be part of this baby's life. I paused, hand on the doorknob, such a familiar threat, withholding relationships as punishment for not meeting her demands. How many times over the years had I given in out of fear of exactly this scenario? How many boundaries had I let be crossed? How much dignity sacrificed to maintain the illusion of family harmony? That would be a shame, I said quietly. But it would be your choice, just as the will is mine. I stepped out of the kitchen, crossed the living room where some remaining guests were helping clean up. Nathan stood near the front door, talking with the young woman I'd seen earlier, but his eyes followed my movements through the room. Grandma, he called as I approached. Everything okay? Yes, I said, surprised to find it true. I'm heading home now, his brow furrowed with concern. Let me drive you. No need, I assured him. Stay. Enjoy the rest of the celebration. I looked at the young woman beside him, noticing kindness in her eyes. Nice to meet you, I said. We haven't been properly introduced. She smiled warmly. I'm Emma. Nathan's told me a lot about you. All good things, I hope, I said, and her nod confirmed it. Nathan's expression softened as he looked between us. I'll call you tomorrow, Grandma, he promised as I stepped onto the porch. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink as I walked to my car, casting long shadows across Rachel's perfect lawn. Behind me, I could hear the continuing sounds of the celebration, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. Life would go on. Rachel would have her child. Nathan would build his future. And I would continue my quiet life, tending my garden, reading my books, enjoying the small moments of beauty. As I drove away, I caught a movement in the living room window. Rachel was watching me leave, her expression unreadable from this distance. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for what might have been, for the relationship we'd never been able to build. But then the feeling passed, replaced by a deep sense of peace. I had done what I needed to do. I had protected myself, honored my worth, and ensured that my legacy rested in hands that truly treasured it. The road home stretched before me, bathed in the golden light of afternoon. And as I drove, I felt lighter than I had in years, no longer burdened by expectations I could never meet, by a role I could never play to Rachel's satisfaction. I was simply Dorothy Albright. Not perfect, not extraordinary, but worthy of respect. Worthy of being seen for what I truly was, not for what others wanted me to be. And wasn't that, in the end, all any of us wanted? Not crowns, not thrones, not elaborate celebrations. Just the quiet dignity of being acknowledged for what we truly are,